So my name is Kelly Falcone. This is a former job that I had, which was an advertising media planner. And the last place that I worked as an advertising media planner is a big ad agency called Ogilvy and Mather in New York. The media planners in the advertising agency help the client decide where to advertise in order to reach whatever their target audience is. So we use market research, we have discussions with the other teams in the agency, the creative team, the account management team. So we might have a team meeting, we may have a client meeting because would meet directly with clients. We also would negotiate with the media outlets, the television stations, the radio stations, I didn't have social media at the time when I did this, but obviously that would be part of it now, and also magazines. So we would have meetings with the sales representatives from there as well. Part of the day might also be spent putting together a presentation for a client, or making a change to an existing plan, or analyzing the results of a particular plan. So that's sort of what a typical day might look like. Well, we worked as a team at an ad agency, so we had the account management team that oversaw, all of the work that we did, and we're the direct liaison with the client. Then you have the creative team, which is what most people associate with advertising, if you've watched Mad Men or anything like that, where they usually there was a team of a copywriter and an art director that worked for each account, or a bigger team than that, depending on how big the account was, that designed the actual ads and the copy. When I was actually in the business around the year 2000, they actually shifted and decided, for economies of scale, to move the media function out of the ad agency environment and actually start these standalone media companies that combined parent company media people with other agencies, just to have bigger negotiating power with the media outlets. So instead of having $10 million worth of business to negotiate, it would be $100 million worth of business or more. I worked as a busgirl at a country club, probably very similar to Noe, in high school. I also worked in retail in high school. I did do a summer job at an ad agency, kind of working as an administrative assistant while I was in college. So while I didn't have a formal internship, I did have the experience of doing that, and I think that helped me be able to get a job when I applied for one when I graduated. No. I started school as a psychology major and thought I wanted to be a psychologist. Then didn't want to go directly to grad school, and to actually have a job in psychology, you need a master's degree. A friend of mine suggested switching to communications and thought I would be good at that, so I switched majors in my junior year and graduated a semester late. My dad was the one who suggested advertising because he had a friend that worked in advertising, and I sort of fell into it and did it for 10 years. So, and then I obviously had a family, and I've changed careers beyond that. So no, so it was not something that I was expecting to do, and it was very math oriented, which was surprising because I wasn't a particularly strong student in math, but I did very well in the position. So I worked for a very large company. I just looked at the statistics. The media company that I had worked for at the end of that portion of my career has 10,000 people worldwide, I think now. So I typically worked for global companies. There was one stint for a couple of years where I worked for a smaller US-based company, but they kind of got swallowed up by somebody else. That was the trend, to have, as I said, these bigger economies of scale businesses. While I think there may be some media planners at smaller ad agencies and maybe even at smaller companies, generally speaking, it's mostly the bigger media companies and advertising companies that you find the position. So benefits-wise, I loved the amount of training, the amount of opportunities that were there. There were a variety of different types of clients. I worked on everything from Procter & Gamble to IBM computers to Jaguar cars. I had like a lot of different opportunities and things like that. But as a bigger company too, you don't get to know everybody necessarily, it's not as intimate. When I worked at smaller companies, you got to really know your coworkers much more closely, whereas you sort of knew your sphere, your little small team, but you didn't necessarily know everyone else in a larger environment. Nope, bachelor's degree, and while a lot of times we did look for someone with an advertising or marketing degree, we hired all sorts of liberal arts people as well, and it's just really critical thinking skills and analytical skills that are really important. So my clients usually were marketing people at companies. So the marketing person at Jaguar, the marketing person at a particular division of IBM. And so they were the client for both, for everyone at the agency. So sometimes, depending on how big the company was, there might be multiple clients, and sometimes there might just be one primary marketing person. But that was who our clients were. It's a salary, and it's not a really high salary to start off with, because it used to be a very glamorous job. You get used to, get invited to all these cool media parties and things. I think some of that still goes on, and it looks like from when I looked up the compensation, it's better than what I started off as. But it's more of you start to make more money as you move up, and it's more entry level is not as high paying as some other professions, but it's because it's kind of a cool, interesting job. So I learned a lot about teamwork. I learned a lot about, actually, now that I'm an entrepreneur, trying to do my own marketing. I learned about how to do that to some extent from working in the marketing environment. I also learned how to work with a lot of different types of people, because, for example, the creative department approached things very differently than we did. We were very analytical, and they, sort of saw things in a different way. So learning how to work with people who think differently than you do was a really valuable skill, I think. It was actually, especially being in my 20s, it was a great place to develop friendships and relationships with younger people. It was a very young, energetic environment. So there were always people to go hang out with. There were always parties to go to. There were always people to have lunch with. There was always cool things to do. So that was actually really fun. When we worked as part of the ad agency, we were kind of the least, paid the least in terms of compared to some of the other departments, and also not valued as much. I think when that shifted to bigger media companies, that was a little different. But so I always kind of felt like a, man out or lower, whatever. And I think a lot of my colleagues felt that way as well. And it was sometimes hard for us to get involved in some of the bigger meetings or things like that, because we weren't the account managers on the business. And so it depended on what the client wanted. I wish I had known that they were going to spin off the media divisions of the company. At that time, I actually had changed my job to become a recruiter for the company, so it didn't impact me as much. But I actually really loved being part of the entire creative process, and that changed. So I don't think I would have changed my mind, but I think a lot of media people didn't like being separated from the other parts of the creative development process. I definitely would recommend work with college to find an internship, because that really, I used to recruit for my agency when I took that job, and that was one of the top things that I looked for. It wasn't even very important to me what their major was, and part of that was because they gained some experience, and so they were already coming in a little experience. But the other thing is because I described that this was not a very high paying position to start off with, we want people that know this is what they want to do. So if you've had an internship or had some sort of experience where you kind of get a real idea for what it's like on the inside, then I know you're more likely to stay with me for a little while versus, quit the job after 6 months and then I have to find someone else to replace you. So, well, certainly they'd want to look at the American Association of Advertising Agencies. There's also Advertising Age and Ad Week, what are the two main trade publications for advertising in general. I think there is a media week online now, but sometimes there's subdivisions. I think there's a social media week too. So to take a look at some of the trade publications can be certainly helpful. I don't even know if they print them anymore. I know that they're online. And also Ad Age will give you a sort of a feel for the business overall in general for advertising. So.